They laughed at me for being paranoid, but what I found in the video changed my life forever. My name is Thomas Stonewall Jackson, but most people call me Tom. I'm 32 years old, an accountant by profession, and I live in a small town on the outskirts of Denver, Colorado. My life, while relatively ordinary, was about to take a sharp, unexpected turn that would shake me to my core. I've been married to Janice for 5 years. She's a beautiful woman, intelligent, and fiercely independent, and she works as a paralegal at the prestigious Remington Law Group. Lately, though, things hadn't been the same between us. We had been drifting apart. Janice had become distant, both emotionally and physically. Whenever I tried to talk to her about it, she brushed me off, telling me that it was just stress from work. But I knew something was off. It had been a few months of this cold distance, and my frustration was mounting. I started to wonder if she was seeing someone else. Maybe she had grown tired of me, or perhaps she had found someone who could provide the excitement I could no longer give her. One evening, after an unusually tense dinner, Janice dropped a bombshell. "Tom," she said, her voice quieter than usual, "I have something to tell you. I've been offered a promotion at work. I'll be Darren Hanson's new executive assistant." I froze. Darren Hanson? The senior partner? How long has this been in the works? I asked, trying to mask the panic creeping into my voice. She looked away. "A couple of months now. I should have told you sooner, I guess. But I didn't want to worry you." I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. Janice had been acting strange for months, and now she was telling me about a promotion that had been going on for months without a word from her. Something didn't sit right. "And is that why you've been distant?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She nodded, her face softening. "I'm sorry, Tom. I didn't mean to shut you out. It's just been a lot to deal with." I was silent for a moment, the weight of her words hanging between us. "So, you've been avoiding me because of a promotion?" She bit her lip, her gaze shifting to the floor. "Not just that. It's complicated." I had to admit I was intrigued but also unsettled. "Complicated how?" Janice hesitated, then took a deep breath. "The firm, they're hosting a weekend retreat at Darren's country estate to celebrate my promotion. It's supposed to be a sort of team-building thing. We're leaving Thursday, and I need you to take Friday off so we can go." I couldn't help the suspicion that crept up in my mind. "Why didn't you mention any of this before?" I asked. "I didn't want you to feel left out," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure whether I should feel relieved that she was offering an explanation or more anxious than ever. She seemed genuinely excited about the trip, but there was something in the way she said it that made me uneasy. And Darren Hanson, there was no denying the man had power. The way Janice spoke about him, the way she glowed when mentioning his name, made me wonder if there was more to their professional relationship than she was letting on. Still, I tried to shake off the feeling. "All right, I'll take Friday off," I said, forcing a smile. "It sounds like a good opportunity for you." Janice looked relieved. "Thank you, Tom. I promise it'll be a weekend you'll never forget." That night, as I lay awake, the unease I'd been pushing down bubbled back to the surface. Something about this weekend was off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I knew I had to go. I had to see for myself what was really going on. The next morning, I packed my things and made sure everything was ready for our trip. Janice was practically bouncing off the walls with excitement, packing enough clothes for a week instead of just the weekend. But I let it go. If this trip meant that much to her, then maybe it would be good for us. We left that afternoon, the drive to Darren's estate taking longer than expected thanks to some freeway traffic. As we neared the secluded mansion, the last sliver of sunlight was fading from the sky. I was starting to feel the weight of the weekend settling on my shoulders, the dread gnawing at the back of my mind. When we reached the front gates of the property, my unease hit its peak. A man in a dark suit greeted us at the gate, asking for the access code. As he opened the gate, I noticed two other men in similar attire standing near the front door of the mansion. Their faces were unreadable, their posture rigid. It felt like we were entering a fortress rather than a weekend getaway. "Is everything okay?" I asked, looking at Janice as we pulled up to the mansion's entrance. "Everything's fine," she said with a smile, though it seemed a little forced. "Just relax, Tom. This is going to be good for us." But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something I didn't understand, something dangerous. The mansion loomed in front of me, its towering structure framed by the fading light. It felt like something out of a Gothic novel, too grand and too cold. Janice seemed excited, practically skipping as we walked toward the entrance, but I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being led into a trap. The door swung open, and a tall man with dark curly hair greeted us. I recognized him immediately, Darren Hansen, the senior partner at Janice's firm, the man who had been making her glow with excitement over the last few weeks. I'd met him at a couple of company events, but his demeanor, here in his own domain, was completely different. It was as if the man was a king in his castle, and we were the lowly subjects. "Thomas, Janice," Darren boomed, giving us both a warm handshake. "It's good to finally have you here. I trust the trip was smooth." I nodded stiffly. "Yeah, the drive was a bit long, but we made it." Darren smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Wonderful. Let me show you around. I'm sure you'll find this place memorable." As Darren led us inside, I couldn't help but notice the armed security stationed around the estate. Their presence was subtle but ever so unsettling. Why did a country estate need this much protection? And why did it feel like we were being watched every moment we were here? Janice didn't seem bothered by any of this, which only deepened my unease. She was too relaxed, too comfortable in this environment. It wasn't like her. A few months ago, she would have been as uncomfortable as I was. But now she walked with an air of confidence that sent a chill down my spine. We were escorted upstairs by a man named Harold, one of Darren's security staff, who handed us the key cards to our room. The room itself was exquisite, furnished with elegant furniture, a massive bed, and a fireplace that added an extra touch of grandeur. But despite the luxury, something felt wrong. I noticed the heavy curtains were drawn, the windows obscured, as if they were hiding something. As we settled into the room, Janice busied herself with unpacking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I walked to the window and peered outside, noticing the strange presence of guards patrolling the grounds. There was even a helicopter pad nearby, though the night was too dark to see much. "Janice," I called, my voice laced with concern. "Why do they need all these guards? This place feels like a fortress." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at me, her eyes distant, as if she were trying to piece together what to say. "They're just being cautious," she said finally. "You'll see. It's nothing to worry about." But I was worried. I could feel the tension creeping in, like the walls were closing in around me. I was starting to doubt everything, her behavior, the trip, and even our marriage. I had no idea what was going on, but I knew I had to stay vigilant. Later that night, as we were getting ready for bed, I felt the need to reach out to my father. Something didn't feel right, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I slipped out of bed and walked quietly down the hall, hoping to find a phone. The hall was eerily silent, and I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. At the end of the hallway, I found one of Darren's armed men stationed near a small desk. I approached cautiously, trying not to raise suspicion. "I need to make a call," I said. "There's no cell service in the room." The guard didn't respond immediately, but then nodded. "Follow me." He led me to a small, windowless room with an old-fashioned landline phone. As I sat down and dialed my father's number, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The guard stood at the door, silent and unblinking, making me feel even more like a prisoner. When my father answered, his voice groggy, I quickly explained the situation. "Dad, I don't know what's going on, but I need you to be careful. This place feels wrong." My father's voice was steady, even though I could tell he had been asleep. "Stay alert, Tom. Trust your instincts. And remember what I told you about keeping an eye on things. If something's off, don't hesitate to leave." After the call ended, I returned to the room, but my mind was still racing. Janice was already asleep, her breathing steady and calm, but I couldn't relax. I felt a sense of impending doom, like the storm clouds were gathering. As I lay there, I noticed something else. The bed seemed smaller than I remembered, the sheets stiffer. And then I saw it, the bars on the outside of the window. They weren't for decoration. They were a prison's bars. I glanced back at Janice, but she didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. I couldn't help but wonder, was she truly as clueless as she seemed? Or was there something she wasn't telling me? The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside. The sun was barely rising, casting a soft golden light across the room. But I couldn't shake the heaviness in the air. I felt trapped, though Janice seemed to have no concerns at all. She was already up, getting ready for the day with a smile that seemed more artificial than genuine. "Morning, Tom. Ready for breakfast?" she asked, her voice bright. I nodded, though my stomach churned with unease. "Yeah, sure." As we made our way downstairs, I noticed that the house was unnervingly quiet. There were no sounds of life, no laughter, no chatter. It felt like we were in some sort of eerie vacuum, suspended in time. The only sounds came from the occasional clink of silverware or the shuffle of feet on the marble floor. When we entered the dining area, I saw 3 other men and a woman seated around a large, round table. They were all dressed sharply, their expressions cold and businesslike. I recognized 2 of them from past company events, Rick Harmon and Glenn Oldman, 2 senior executives at the firm. But the woman, Eve Carson, was new to me. Janice greeted everyone with her usual charm, but I couldn't help but feel like an outsider in the midst of these strangers. I was already on edge, and now, sitting down at the table, I felt even more out of place. "Tom," Darren said, offering me a handshake. "Good to see you this morning. I trust you slept well." I didn't want to lie, but I also didn't want to raise any suspicion. "Yeah, I slept fine. Thanks for asking." Eve, the woman I hadn't met before, gave me a polite but slightly probing smile. "It's nice to finally meet you, Mr. Jackson. I've heard a lot about you." "Please call me Tom," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. But the way she was looking at me made me feel like I was being sized up, scrutinized. As we sat down to eat, I couldn't help but notice the tension in the room. The executives exchanged glances every so often, as if there were some unspoken agreement between them. The conversation was polite, but it felt forced, like everyone was just going through the motions. And then I realized what it was. There was something behind their words, a hidden agenda I couldn't quite decipher. "So, Tom," Rick asked, interrupting my thoughts, "I understand you were in the military? What did you do?" I glanced at Janice, who seemed uncomfortable at the mention of my service. "I was a scout sniper in the Marines," I said, trying to keep it simple. "Scout sniper?" Ryan, another executive, asked with a chuckle. "So, basically, you killed people?" The comment hit me like a slap in the face. I could feel the room go silent as the others exchanged uncomfortable glances. Even Janice stiffened beside me, but I didn't let it bother me. It wasn't the first time I had been questioned about my service, and it wouldn't be the last. "Yeah, I suppose you could put it that way," I said with a cold smile. "But it's not as glamorous as people think. I was just doing my job." There was a brief silence before Darren spoke up again. "Impressive," he said, his voice smooth but laced with something I couldn't quite identify. "But I imagine your work is much different now, Tom." I nodded, trying to steer the conversation away from my past. "Yeah, I work as a forensic accountant now. My father runs Jackson Specialty Investigations. And that's where Janice works too, right?" Eve asked, her tone now more pointed. "Yes," I replied, my eyes narrowing slightly. "She's a paralegal at the firm." Janice shifted in her seat, looking anywhere but at me. She was acting strangely, like she was trying to avoid my gaze. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I felt like there was something more to this than just a simple business retreat. The breakfast went on in a stilted fashion, with forced small talk and uncomfortable silences. The more I observed the others, the more I felt that they were hiding something. I glanced at Janice again, but this time, she wasn't meeting my eyes. It was like she was lost in thought or perhaps avoiding something or someone. After breakfast, Darren suggested a tour of the property. "The grounds are beautiful," he said. "Why don't we take a walk, Tom? I think you'll enjoy the view." I hesitated for a moment. "Sure," I said, trying to play along. "I'd like that." Eve accompanied us on the walk, and we wandered down a manicured path lined with tall trees and hedges. It was peaceful, almost surreal. But even as I tried to enjoy the tranquility, I couldn't help but feel like something was watching me. "So, Tom," Eve said, breaking the silence, "how do you feel about Janice's promotion? It must be a big step for her." I wasn't sure how to answer. "I'm happy for her, of course, but I have to admit, I'm a little concerned. It's a big change." Eve chuckled softly. "Don't worry, she's in good hands. Darren has a way of making things happen. You'll see." I wasn't sure how to take that comment. It sounded almost like a warning, but it was hard to tell. Eve's tone was smooth and calculating, and I wasn't sure if I should trust her. As we walked further down the path, I noticed the helicopter pad in the distance, its metallic surface gleaming under the sun. There were more guards around, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were monitoring our every move. Finally, Eve stopped near a small pond and sat on a bench, motioning for me to join her. "Tom, there's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice suddenly serious. I sat down next to her, my heart racing. "What's going on, Eve? What aren't you telling me?" She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes piercing. "You're a smart man, Tom. I think you already know what's happening. Janice's new role. It's more than just a promotion. Darren expects a lot more from her." I felt a lump form in my throat. "What do you mean?" Eve's voice dropped to a whisper. "Darren doesn't just want Janice as his assistant. He wants her in other ways, and he expects you to accept it." I froze. "What are you talking about?" Eve's gaze turned cold. "Janice is already involved with Darren. They've already been intimate, and she'll do whatever he asks of her to keep her position." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't process it at first. "No, that's not possible." Eve sighed. "I'm afraid it's true, but if you cooperate, Tom, you'll be taken care of. Janice will be set for life. You too, if you just fall in line." I was speechless. My mind was racing, my blood boiling. This wasn't just a promotion. This wasn't just a weekend retreat. It was something much darker, much more dangerous. I stood up abruptly. "You're lying," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "I won't let this happen." Eve smiled, a knowing look on her face. You don't have a choice, Tom. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. My heart raced, my palms sweated, and my mind was spinning. Janice, my wife, was involved with Darren? I had suspected something was wrong, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. Eve's words echoed in my mind, each one hitting me like a blow to the chest. You don't have a choice, Tom, Eve had said, her voice cold and unwavering. This is happening whether you like it or not. You can either accept it or... She didn't need to finish. The implications were clear enough. I felt the overwhelming urge to confront Janice, to demand the truth, but something held me back. My gut told me that she was just as much a victim in this as I was, though I didn't know how to prove it. Could she have been manipulated by Darren all this time? Or had she truly chosen this life, this power, over our marriage? I tried to push the thoughts aside as I made my way back toward the mansion, Eve's chilling words still fresh in my mind. But as I approached the front steps, I saw Janice. She was standing outside, speaking quietly with Darren. The way they stood so close to each other, their body language intimate, made my blood run cold. I paused, my hand on the doorknob, but I couldn't bring myself to enter. Part of me wanted to run, just leave this entire place behind. But I couldn't. I was too deep now. My life was at a crossroads and I had to make a choice. Without thinking, I stepped toward them, my footsteps loud in the quiet air. Janice turned at the sound, her eyes wide with surprise. Darren looked over his shoulder, a knowing smile tugging at his lips. Tom, there you are, he said in that smooth, patronizing voice of his. I was just explaining a few things to Janice. I think you should hear this too. My fists clenched. I don't need to hear anything from you, I said, my voice low and tight. I just need the truth from her. Janice looked down, her face flushed with guilt. Tom, I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Sorry, I repeated, my voice rising in disbelief. Sorry for what? For betraying me? For lying to me for months? Or is this just how it works now? You do whatever Darren wants, and I'm supposed to just accept it. She flinched at my words, and for a moment, I saw something in her eyes, a flicker of regret, of fear, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. Darren stepped forward, placing a hand on Janice's shoulder. Tom, you need to calm down, Darren said, his tone mocking. This is just the way things are now. Janice has made her choice, and you'll have to accept it, whether you like it or not. That was it. That was the final straw. You think I'm just going to roll over and let you take everything from me? I snapped, stepping closer to him. You've got another thing coming. Darren didn't flinch, his smile only widening. You don't have a choice, Tom. We both know that. Janice knows it too. I turned to Janice, my heart breaking at the sight of her, standing there, passive and resigned. Is this what you want? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. For me to just accept this? To watch you become his? Her eyes welled with tears, but she remained silent. I saw the guilt in her expression, but I also saw the fear of what would happen if she didn't comply. Darren's grip on her life was tight, too tight for her to escape. As the silence stretched between us, I realized that this wasn't just about a marriage falling apart. This was something much darker, a conspiracy that reached far deeper than I had ever imagined. Janice's career, her very life, had been tied to Darren's manipulations, and now I was just a pawn in his game. I turned away from them both, my chest tight with anger and betrayal. I'm done with this, I said, my voice firm. I'm not going to let you destroy me. I don't care what you've got planned, Darren. You won't break me. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked back toward the guest house, my mind racing. There was no turning back now. I couldn't go home and pretend that everything was fine. I needed to act, and I needed to act fast. The night fell quickly, and the estate grew quiet. But I wasn't going to let this night pass without doing something about it. I had a plan now, something that could expose everything, something that would bring the truth to light and stop Darren in his tracks. I wasn't going to be a victim any longer. I sat down at the desk in the guest room and began to write a message, my fingers flying over the keys of my phone. I knew who to call, and I knew what I had to do. It was time to play the game on my terms. The next morning, as I was preparing for breakfast, I noticed that the atmosphere in the house had shifted. It was subtle, but it was there. The security was tighter, and Darren's demeanor had changed. He seemed more guarded, as if he knew something was coming, though he had no idea what. When I entered the dining room, I saw Darren, Rick, and Glenn already seated, talking in hushed tones. Janice was sitting at the table too, her eyes downcast. It felt like a meeting, but one that had a dark, ominous tone to it. "Tom, good morning," Darren said, his voice stiff. "We need to talk." I didn't sit down. I stood by the door, my arms crossed. "I think we've talked enough, Darren," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a knife. "Now it's time for you to hear the truth." I stood there, my heart hammering in my chest as the weight of the moment settled over me. Darren and the others were watching, waiting for me to say something. But what was there left to say? I had already confronted Janice, already told her everything I felt. But now it was time to make my move. Time to finally expose the truth, to take back control of my life. Darren leaned back in his chair, a smug look on his face. "What's this, Tom? You think you can just walk in here and change everything? You've been out of the loop for far too long." I could see the contempt in his eyes, but there was something else there too, fear. He knew I was on to him, and he knew that his empire, built on manipulation and control, was about to come crashing down. "I don't think you understand, Darren," I said, my voice steady. "This isn't just about you or me. This is about Janice too, and what you've done to her." Janice's head snapped up, her eyes wide with confusion. "Tom, what are you talking about? What do you mean, what I've done to me?" I turned to her, my gaze softening, but my voice unwavering. "Janice, this whole time, I thought I was the one who was losing you. I thought it was just my fault that things were falling apart between us. But it wasn't just me. It was him," I said, pointing at Darren. "He's been pulling the strings, and you've been too afraid to see it." Janice looked like she wanted to protest, but the words wouldn't come. The truth was sinking in, and there was nothing she could say to deny it. Darren, on the other hand, tried to act unfazed, but I could see the anxiety creeping into his eyes. "You really think you can walk away from this, Tom?" Darren sneered. "You don't know what you're up against. You don't know who you're dealing with." But I had done my homework. I had a plan. I had known what I was up against the entire time. The only difference now was that I wasn't going to stand by and let them destroy me without a fight. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," I said, my voice calm but fierce. "I've already called for backup." Darren's face paled, and his jaw clenched. "What do you mean? You think you can just—" Before he could finish, the door flew open, and in walked Sheriff Robert Jackson, my uncle. Behind him were several other officers, all armed and ready. They moved quickly, taking Darren and his associates by surprise. The security guards, who had been positioned around the mansion, stood frozen as the deputies moved in, disarming them and cuffing them with professional efficiency. "Mr. Hanson," my uncle said, his voice calm but firm, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and multiple counts of assault." You and your associates will be taken into custody immediately." Darren tried to move, but the officers quickly restrained him. "You can't do this," he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "I'll have you all fired. You'll never work again." But it was too late. The law had already caught up with him. As the deputies escorted Darren and his associates out of the house, I turned to Janice. She was still standing there, her face pale, her hands trembling. She looked lost, confused, and broken. "Janice, I know you've been manipulated," I said softly, "but I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending everything is okay when it's not." She looked up at me, tears in her eyes. I didn't know how deep it went, Tom. I was just trying to protect us, to make sure we were secure. I didn't realize what I was doing to you." I shook my head, the hurt still there but softened by the understanding that we had both been victims of this twisted game. "I know, but I can't keep doing this. I can't be part of this anymore." She nodded slowly, her tears falling freely now. "I'm so sorry, Tom. I never meant for any of this to happen." I stood there, unsure of what to say next. But then my uncle stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You did good, Tom. You're free now. Both of you are." The tension that had gripped me for so long slowly began to dissipate. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of relief. The nightmare was over. A week later, Darren Hansen and his associates were arrested and charged with a wide range of crimes, including financial fraud, exploitation, and manipulation. The evidence I had gathered, along with my uncle's swift action, had brought down one of the most powerful men in the legal world. Janice, while still dealing with the emotional fallout of her involvement, was determined to rebuild her life, free from the grip of Darren's control. As for me, I filed for divorce. It was a difficult decision, but one I knew was right. I had spent too many years questioning myself, blaming myself for the unraveling of my marriage. But now I knew the truth. Janice had been a victim too, and the person responsible for everything that had happened wasn't her. It was Darren. Months later, I moved forward with my life, focusing on my career and my own healing. And though I still thought of Janice sometimes, I knew that I had made the right choice for myself.